Hi, this is Mr. Cordes, and today, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to go over and review the fairy tale response paper for week 1 of Children's Literature English 353. This is a great opportunity for you to become the scholar in children's literature, for you to kind of find something that's interesting and begin to analyze it and pull it apart. The purpose of this video is to kind of go over and review. If you at any point have questions or concerns or want to brainstorm or bounce ideas off of me, that's totally fine. Send me an email, send me a message, and we will kind of correspond back and forth. I love this paper. I love this assignment simply because it's interesting to see what each student comes up with. And I say that because you become the scholar as you read through the stories and begin to notice patterns, begin to notice literary elements that kind of match up. So this is always fun for me as an instructor to see what my students kind of materialize, what they bring to the table as far as children's literature is concerned. Before you jump into the text, before you start to brainstorm, there's certain preliminary items that you'll have to do. First, obviously, is to conduct your readings. This assignment asks you to compare and contrast The Princess and Curdie with one of the other fairy tales. So if you look here, there's lots of different fairy tales from this week. You've got Aesop's Fables. You've got some traditional fairy tales. Princess and the Curdie is the primary one that we want you to focus on. And so having good knowledge of that story as well as something that you find familiar. So maybe it's one of the fables, Aesop's Fables. Maybe it's one of the fairy tales. You will also really need to make sure that you go through the reading. Now, Reynolds does a great job of providing a lot of information. Sometimes it gets really heavy and theoretical. Sometimes it's kind of just straightforward. Here's the components of children's literature. As you read through, pick out and pull out those things that kind of resonate with you as far as children's literature and what you're familiar with. So there's like a section on like the multi-layered child reader response. It kind of gets intense at some point. However, use that as a stepping stone for your own analysis. Okay. So start first with the readings. Going through the instructions here, you're writing a 2 to 3 page paper. So this is not write one page and get to the top of the second page. This is all the way to the bottom of the second page, moving into the third. I would not go any farther than 3 pages simply because we do want you to be condensed and focus on the 3 components of this assignment. So the first one is identify and describe 2 significant differences or similarities between The Princess and Curdie and the fairy tale of your choice. So with that being said, 2 significant differences or similarities, that would be like a literary component. So looking at Reynolds' introduction and what's stated in our primary text, what is the component that sticks out to you? Is it magic being used? Is it the characters? Is it the moral or the lesson that's being learned? I, when reading through, really kind of like this idea of poison. And if you read Princess and Curdie, it will make sense and poison is used. But then I began to be thinking about how poison is used in other stories. Not necessarily the ones that we have here, like Cinderella or Hansel and Gretel, but just more of the component of kind of like poison to purposefully hurt someone, to weaken someone's character. The idea of how kind of that's almost like a taunting or manipulating thing that's being used for someone's gain. Those were the things that stuck out to me. You may find something interesting like, oh, this reminds me of Hansel and Gretel. And I wonder if those components of magic's being used or the exaggeration of characters and how they die, right? Like maybe that's something that sticks out to you. So the very first component that you're going to do is to identify and describe those significant items. From there, it's the component of how are they being used? How are they used in each story? Because each story uses them just a little bit different, okay? If you look at Harry Potter uses magic in a certain way versus, I'm looking at my bookshelf over here, versus like a Roald Dahl story, like the Witches or James and the Giant Peach. Those are used differently. Okay. Magic is used differently, and how it is used is different. I currently am reading a V.E. Schwab book. She wrote this series called The Darker Shades of Magic, which is a young adult fantasy. And magic is used very, very differently than what I'm used to for like Chronicles of Narnia or Harry Potter. So taking in those components of what that looks like. So as you read through, you're going to want to pull out some of that stuff that's interesting to you, which is known as a close reading. You'll notice right here, there's a link for the close reading. If you click on that, it takes you to kind of a web from Scholastic, a website on what close reading is and how it's used in the classroom to help students. So when you read this is actually from like a teacher's perspective. OPS put it up here because it's the most thorough explanation for both adult and child. But the close reading is essentially where you go into the text, you find something, and then you begin to analyze it and figure out how it's used just by looking at that one specific component. So when you're going through here and you're reading through this, there's components of what to do and what not to do. You see that here on the screen. There's a list of close reading questions that might help guide you through pulling apart what that is. When I talk about close reading with my high school students, the way I look at it is if I'm a mechanic and I go into a car's engine, I open up the hood and I look at all of the different components, I might pull things out. Okay, I might pull out this swirly cog thing. I'm not a mechanic in any way, shape, or form. And I might say, okay, how is this used in regards to the entire engine? I may pull out like a fan belt and say, why is this connected over here? Okay, you pull out those things, and all of those pieces by themselves are useless. You have to put them together. So when you go into a story, you're pulling out, what is the idea of poison that's being used here? What is the idea of this character and being so malicious, right? What is it about the lessons that we learn? And what do readers pick up? Like, you're pulling apart the book, but then analyzing how does it fit into the bigger realm. So that's what close reading is. You go into a text, you find certain things, and you understand how does this function with everything else. Okay, so you're essentially a mechanic of literature right now, pulling apart, wow, what does this character really mean? What does this multi-layered, lesson being learned, right? Maybe you're applying the Christianity approach from the article that we read. What are the Christian themes that we see emerging from here, right? Children having to select between right and wrong, and this idea of morality for them. As you pull that apart, you begin to see, okay, this is what I think. This is what I say. This is how it's being used. So when you go into this story, when you go into this assignment using your two stories, you're going to first, what is it that you want to analyze? That's the literary component. And then the second, how is it being used? How is your component being used in Princess and Curdie versus your other story? So you kind of begin to see the two and see how they're similar or see how they're different. Okay. If I was going to use the concepts of magic, how is it used for Harry Potter versus my V.E. Schwab book of The Darker Shades of Magic? So how is magic used? Why is it used this way? And that's the third part. Why? Interpret the significance of the two. And what does that mean? And I'm going to support that. So why is it being used in such a fashion? Because what does it add to the story? What does this idea of poison add to the Princess and Curdie? What does the concepts of Hansel and Gretel, where you have these characters out in the woods and traveling, like, what do they learn, right? The idea of Cinderella and the glass slipper, and what are the components in here that are just kind of different than what we are familiar with when we see the Princess and Curdie. So looking here at these components, I actually have written it out over here. These are the instructions that you see on Blackboard, but these are kind of the steps, all right? Number one, I would identify the literary elements that you want to use in both of those readings. Okay. The second thing that you're going to do is identify how, ladies and gentlemen, how each literary element is used within those stories. This I would, if we were in the classroom, I'd actually take an opportunity for us to do a Venn diagram. A Venn diagram, come back over here. I've got so many windows open. If you've done a Venn diagram before, it's essentially comparing and contrasting in nature. What are the two things that we're analyzing? How are they similar? Okay. So how is my component in both of the texts being used? How are they similar, or what is that significance within them? So while I love technology and I love working on the computer and I love online classes, sometimes just getting like regular paper to do my notes, because that helps us to kind of process differently versus just sitting on a screen. So if you wanted to use the Venn diagram to say, okay, these are the two components, here's how they're different, and then here in the center is how they are similar, that similarity will help you get to that third component. Interpret the significance of the two. How is it being used? And obviously you're going to show that with the compare and contrast, with your textual evidence while you compare and contrast. Here's the bigger question. What does this do for the reader? Okay. You have to take in consideration what is going on for the reader while they read through this story. What is going on for the child? Okay. If the book is written for a 12, 13, 14-year-old, what's going on for that individual in life that would resonate, right? You've got Hansel and Gretel, two small children wandering through the forest. What is going on for them in that moment? What is going on for our reader in that moment? Okay. So that would be the very third, partly the third. The third thing would be to find textual evidence that relates back to your components. Okay, so pull out examples from each of your story. And then the last component would be, why is a literary element important or significant to the reader? Why are these literary elements, these components, so prevalent in your story, and what does that do for the reader? So if you look at this, you've got 4 steps, a process here that will help you with this fairy tale response paper. Remember that this is an academic writing, so you're not going to want to be personal in it. I found that I read, because I remember, we don't want a Dear Diary moment. We want this to be academic because this is an upper division literature course. So removing the personal voice to make this academic. The Princess and Curdie offers readers insights into the malicious works of a character. Reynolds identifies, you want to begin, this is an academic paper. You are the scholar in this academic realm. So your personal writing will come when you do your reflections, will come when you do your weekly journals, those types of things. But here you are comparing and contrasting in an academic fashion. So as you go through, take some time to think of your components. Let me leave this here for a moment so you can see, write down, or copy. You want to identify what are the literary elements that you want to talk and discuss from your 2 stories. Okay. How are they being used in each of them? You can do your Venn diagram activity. Go ahead into your text to find pieces of textual evidence and examples to support those ideas. And then come into, why is that important for the reader? What are they pulling away from? Our Reynolds reading will actually probably help you with the why. Okay. It offers a lot of, this is why we do this. This is why children's literature exemplifies X, Y, and Z. So the Reynolds reading will help you piece that together as well. Okay. So message me if you have any questions or concerns. It's always good to start this in the beginning of the week just to get your brain going and thinking about it. To piece this together in the last hours of a Sunday is not going to be beneficial for you. You want to piece this together as you go. So going through the reading, be like, it's interesting about, this part of symbolism in children's literature, and using that as you go into the text to analyze and close read and pull things apart and say, how is this being used for the bigger picture and why? Okay. So that's a lot of information for a 15-minute video. If you have questions or concerns, message me along the way. I'm glad to help and brainstorm and scaffold with you. But yeah, have fun with this. Find something that's interesting. I can't wait to see what you guys do. I'll talk to you guys soon. Bye.